There we go. Now my mic's working. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our stream tonight on smartphone astrophotography. My name is Jeremy Cardy, and I'll be leading the presentation tonight. We want to thank Broom Pediatrics for sponsoring this batch of Friday night programs, and we are going to continue these into February, and hopefully we'll keep on after that. Be on the lookout for more observing live streams as well. We are, let me make sure, no video. Oh, there we go. I forgot to hit the transition button. Okay. So now you can see me and you can hear me. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's handy having this watch on because I can see if there's any technical difficulties. There's an echo as well. Why is there an echo? Oh, I see. Get rid of that one. Okay, now you should be able to hear me without an echo. Sorry for that batch. There's Okay. Well, anyways, now I'm all flustered. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. Now, I also noticed our max resolution in this stream is only 480p. I tried to correct that beforehand, but it would not let me. So hopefully for our next streams, we can bump it up back to HD. But for whatever reason right now, it's stuck at 480. Perfect. Jeremy, you're muted. Am I still muted? I don't think I'm still muted. Let me test it on here. Nope, it's coming through on mine. So I think I'm okay now. Also, I wanted to mention, too, we have super chats available in addition to our regular donation link in the video description. So the cool thing about super chats, though, is you can set a set amount for the donation, and based on that donation, it'll post your chat up at the very top for me to see, and it'll leave it there for a set amount of time based on the donation you gave. So it's a good way if the chat ever gets crazy and you have a really good question to ask, you can do it through Super Chat. We also appreciate any support you can provide just in the regular donation link if you prefer to go that route. Okay. Let me make sure I can see those chats in case they pop up, and I'll be paying attention to the regular chat, of course, too. So, as I said, tonight's program is on astronomical imaging with a smartphone. We're going to do a quick presentation at the beginning, and then I'll switch over back to the video camera, where we can get in fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add that webcam. Make sure that shows up on the stream. Webcam. There it is. So that's the plan. So why don't we go on into the presentation mode. We'll transit here. Make sure that worked. I'm waiting to see that confirmation that it comes up here on the stream. Okay, it is now. Okay, so you can see my presentation. So again, talking about smartphone astrophotography. I'd love to hear from you if you've done any smartphone astrophotography throughout the show. Make sure I'm not echoing. Nope. So let me know, and we'll talk about what you've taken images of, and you can compare to what I've taken pictures of. Here at the beginning on my title slide, you can see a picture of the Orion constellation, as well as Taurus the Bull over here. And this is Sirius as part of Canis Major, the big dog there. And here's Orion in the center, and you can even see the Orion Nebula. And this was taken with a smartphone. And it's you know, you could compare it to something like a cheap DSLR, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, which is pretty impressive that we can get that kind of quality out of a smartphone now, like just with something you're carrying around in your pocket all the time. So let's carry on here. Again, my name is Jeremy. If you're new to the stream and have any questions, also I forgot to mention too, if you're new tonight, feel free to hit the subscribe button for future programs. We are building up a community here of like-minded people that are just interested in exploring space. So, and we have other programs too that are really, it's an all-encompassing exploration of science, not just space exploration, but we do a lot of that because we are an observatory. So let's see, I'm going to go over what we're going to talk about tonight. I have some clarifications to make about smartphone astrophotography. I want to talk about my experience, my personal experiences using my smartphone to take astro images. I'm going to go through sort of a chronological gallery. It's not perfectly chronological, but the whole idea there is to sort of show you how far astrophotography through a smartphone has come, and possibly where we can expect it to go. We can talk a little bit about that too. Then I'm going to go through the getting started sections, which are designed to help you understand how to take astrophotos with your smartphone at home. Just checking the chat here. Looks good. All right, keep going. Then we're going to go how to capture planets and how we can uncover objects in the deep sky, like deep sky objects like star clusters and nebula, things like that. So going into the clarifications, the first point I want to make is that a smartphone really isn't the ideal method for serious or professional astrophotography. There are better tools out there that are designed specifically for astrophotography or just have better sensors overall, like a mirrorless or a DSLR camera, or like the ZWO cameras that we use for our planetary imaging that I've done in my other live streams. Those are all ways if you want to explore astrophotography on a professional level, those are the tools you want to use. However, it's the point of the smartphone camera is it's the camera that you always have on hand, no matter what. The professional astrophotography equipment, you have to lug it around, and also you have to lug a telescope around, and you can build some pretty nice minimal setups that can get you up and going quick for sure. But nothing is going to ever be quicker than pulling out your phone and taking a picture of the sky, if you can do it. And you know, 10 years ago, when you're really dealing with first generation smartphones, that wasn't really a possibility. But now we're getting to that point where you can just take your phone out and snap pictures of the sky, which is brilliant. Okay, so again, the goal here is the smartphone's job is to be good enough at taking pictures. It should be good enough for 90% of the things you do with your smartphone, or rather, the pictures you take with your smartphone. Or I guess really the way I should phrase it, it should be good for 90% of the pictures you take in general. So, and then that extra 10% is where you get, you get a mirrorless camera or DSLR, or astrophotography equipment to really explore that serious side, the professional side of photography. But otherwise, you want your smartphone to be good for if you're just walking through a park and you see something interesting, take a picture. We want to get to that point with astro-imaging too. And I'll try and remember to pause after each section maybe and see if there's any super relevant questions, but really try and I'll hold most of the questions to the end of the show, and that's where we can really get into the details. But if there's something super pertinent, I'll make sure I mention it. People are saying it's blurry. Yeah, see, I was worried about that. For some reason, it's not. It does look a bit blurry, doesn't it? Some people are saying it's not blurry, so it might just be a resolution thing where if you go in the quality settings, you can bump the resolution up to the 480p, but unfortunately that's the maximum for tonight because for whatever reason I couldn't adjust the resolution setting. And I can't adjust it midstream, that is for sure. Okay, some people say it's okay, so we'll carry on. And I am recording this in the background, so if I comes to it, I can re-upload this hopefully at a higher resolution after the show. Okay. So moving on here. Let's talk about my experience, my personal experience with phone-based astrophotography. So it really started in 2011 for me. I had a Android device called a Droid X and had an 8 megapixel sensor, which sounds not bad, right? In fact, I think that a lot of current smartphones are still just using 8 to 12 megapixel sensors. And some, will push way beyond the bounds, and you'll get like a 48 megapixel sensor or something in a phone, which honestly is just marketing. It really doesn't do much for you. Really, you want to. Smartphone makers now are mostly focused on how big you can get the pixels, the individual pixels, to collect more light and different lens structures and just ways to collect as much light as possible rather than focus on the resolution of the sensor. So that's why you haven't seen much growth in that arena. But that 8 megapixel sensor was very poor at collecting light. So really, I only had the option of taking bright objects back in 2011. I had no option of taking any serious wide field photography. So my phone, though, was the only camera I had, and that was the crucial point for me in starting out with astrophotography. I didn't have any other device to take pictures of the sky with, or pictures of planetary objects, or like the moon. So that had to be my go-to if I was going to delve into this. And in 2011, I was still, that would have been 16, I think. So, I didn't have any sort of major income to, go out and buy even a DSLR or something. So, I made do with what I had. And without having that smartphone on that device, I might not have ever delved into astrophotography. But as soon as I started, that took me on a path down an endless road of trying to image the sky. So it all started here for me. And so I kicked off that lifelong journey into astrophotography. Don't intend to quit anytime soon. So now we're going to go into sort of the gallery here of photos I've taken, and I really hope these come across okay over the stream. We'll see what happens. Now, some of them will, at least these initial ones for sure, because they're already low resolution and low quality due to the nature of the camera at the time. So again, this was from that Android 8 megapixel camera sensor. And that first image there is of Saturn. Now, I think that I was at Copernic at the time. I was actually an intern here back in 2011. And I suspect that might have come from the 20-inch, potentially. just based on its magnification, but maybe not. Maybe it came from my at-home telescope. It's hard to say. But I know some of these did come from the 20, and I know I'll point out the ones that do for sure. But there's another one. It took me a while to get. I remember this. It took me a while to get an image of the moon that I was proud of. That one was the first one where I was like, "Oh, that actually looks good. You can actually see significant detail and craters." Fortunately, it was only a very thin crescent. Then I finally had success. But I still think it's pretty neat, and I kept going. That was the moon and Saturn and Jupiter were my main points of focus because I really didn't have many other options beyond that with the camera sensor I had, at least at the start here. So going into some early wide field, just to see what I had to work with here. There's that first image, and this was from, we're transitioning to an iPhone now. This is the iPhone 5, October 8th, 2012. For whatever reason, the metadata captured from the moon in that Saturn picture there from the Android device, it didn't transfer over to my files that I had saved. So I don't know exactly the settings it chose for those pictures. And mind you, at the time, there wasn't any really good manual apps for iOS either. So these settings in the metadata that I found for these pictures were all chosen by the software in the camera app. But it's worth mentioning, and I'll mention it again later, that there are apps now for our smartphones, and even the default apps on Android, that you can do more manual photography. So you can adjust the focus directly. You can adjust ISO. The aperture, usually you would have to switch by switching the camera lenses, because there aren't many phones out there that can actually change their aperture on one lens or on one sensor. The shutter speed can also be changed through those. But at the time of these photos, not the case. So that's all really you can see there is just a picture of the moon and some houses. There actually are some stars, but I doubt they're coming over on the stream. I doubt they're showing up very well. But the moon you can see in the clouds there. I thought it was a pretty nice picture. It's very noisy though. It certainly could be clearer on that front, and actually it would be with modern devices. Okay, here's another one, which let me see how it looks over the stream. Oh, not too bad. So this one here is, believe it or not, a picture of Orion. Orion is down here. There's the belt, his shoulder, Betelgeuse, other shoulder, legs coming down here. And it might just barely be picking out where the Orion Nebula is, but it's maximized its ISO. 3200 was the maximum for this sensor at the time. Again, the aperture was static, and I think this app, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it did allow me to adjust the shutter speed for whatever reason. I didn't have much other control other than that, but I could adjust the shutter speed. So that's why it's incredibly noisy, and really it didn't even pick up much stellar data here either. I also don't know if I was on a tripod, but it's been a while since that picture was taken. That was 2013. Okay, so those are some early wide field images. Let's keep going. We're going to see hopefully a progression as we carry on. Now the moon really was, because there's so much light coming off of it, even with that early Android device I had, with this early iPhone I had quite a bit of success with lunar imaging. And that, as I said, that was my main area of interest at the time anyways, because I was just getting involved with astrophotography. And there's a lot to explore and check out on the moon. So this is a nice zoomed in view of crater Tycho right here. There's crater Tycho. You can see the ejecta. If you've attended our lunar streams before, then I'm sure you would have we would have panned over that crater. This, of course, dropped the ISO way down because that's the sensitivity to light on the sensor. So it didn't need to be terribly sensitive, and by reducing the ISO, it became less noisy. So that should make sense. Again, that's all done automatically. Same with shutter speed. So that was pretty good. Again, that was 2013. Keep going on here. This is a view of the full moon. And that was August 2014. Same device. Again, lower ISO, higher shutter speed. And despite the a huge amount of light coming off a full moon, I was able to reduce the exposure levels low enough where I could pick up a fair amount of detail. It's not very high contrast, but you can see Copernicus crater would be over here. Again, crater Tycho's down here, Mare Tranquility, lots of good detail across the surface there. And you're even able to make out some of the rigidity around the circle of the moon there, where you can tell it's not a perfect sphere. It's rough around the edges. I have a question from David asking, what scope was that phone looking through? So that data has all been lost to me, unfortunately. Just because the way I wasn't very careful at the time of mentioning what scope I used. All of this data came from the metadata that was saved in the photo itself. So that I didn't have to worry about saving on my end, but the telescope information I would have. This could have come, my guess is this came from my personal telescope, which was just a 114 millimeter reflector. But it could have even come from the 6-inch here. It's hard to say, but my guess is it was my personal telescope. Okay, keep going here. I remember this one. This was actually taken on Earth Day. I was like, how can I celebrate Earth Day with some astrophotography? Well, I could take a picture of the ground. I mean, Earth is a planet, right? So it's kind of astrophotography. Or I could take a picture of, the moon in a blue sky, just because it happened to be a nice blue sky that day in 2013 with the moon out. So I took a picture, and it turned out pretty nice, considering. And again, my guess is this was my telescope. I just took it out on that day. I don't think I came up to Copernic on that day. And again, the settings are similar. The shutter speed had to go up quite a bit more because of the daylit sky. So, Linda is asking a very pertinent question too, something we'll get to in more detail in the getting started section. But for a lot of these early ones, I was just holding my phone up to the eyepiece. I was not using any sort of adapter to connect the phone to the eyepiece and keep it all stable. So this is purely just me holding it up and trying to get a good shot before it moved away. And trying to keep my hand as steady as possible. I remember trying to, from time to time, setting my phone up on a tripod and kind of hovering it over the eyepiece so I wasn't holding it in any way. That worked too, but that was a little bit later on, just before I got an adapter. Okay, so here's an early Orion Nebula. This one was through the 20-inch before we put the camera system that's on there right now. That's preventing me from utilizing it, like I've mentioned in streams before, just because I have to get some training on that. But before that, we had an eyepiece on that scope, and we were able to do visual observing and even do some astrophotography like this here with my phone. But even though you have a 20-inch telescope, a massive light bucket, to collect a lot of information on the Orion Nebula here, it still wasn't enough to really give you a good quality photo of the nebula. You still need the ability to take a high exposure to get detail out of that structure. The cool thing about it, though, is this might be one of the better photos I have of the trapezium, which seems, yeah, it looks like it's coming over all right over the stream. The trapezium is that sort of 4-star structure, 4 or 5-star structure in towards the center of the Orion Nebula. So that was actually one of the ways I was able to determine that this was in fact the Orion Nebula, because otherwise it would just look sort of ghostly with just some of this cloudy starlit gas surrounding the stars there. But this is very identifiable, and these stars here trailing out, sort of funneling out of the Orion Nebula. Okay, keep going here. Here's an early Saturn, a little bit more, I guess you could say, advanced from the first one. The cool thing about that first image of Saturn I showed you, though, is you could tell it was early 2010s, because that was when the disk of Saturn's rings was almost facing us. You were looking down the disk rather on its top or bottom, like we are now. I think we're looking at the top side right now. I mean, it's all relative, but back in the early 2010s, you were actually almost looking down the disk, so that's why it was just a thin view of Saturn. But this was further along enough a few years later where you're finally, oh, that's not Saturn. Where'd my Saturn go? Okay, well, I have another view of Saturn coming up. I don't know why that moon lingered in there. We got the same moon again. I probably just accidentally copied and pasted the slide rather than putting Saturn in that one. So here is Jupiter, though, and this is not a stacked image. This would just be a quick snapshot. I didn't do much image stacking at all in those early days, back in 2014 in this case. In fact, image stacking for me is something I really learned how to do in the past year or so. Well, I've had a lot of time to study that more. So there's not much image stacking in my early planetary stuff. So this is pretty good considering that's not a stacked image. It's just I was in the right place at the right time snapping this picture. I think maybe we could even see the great red spot there. It's a little bit hard to tell. But again, given the magnification of this one and the time period as well, I believe this was also from the 20-inch, although we're getting close to the point where we would have replaced that sensor, or that eyepiece section of the 20-inch with the camera system. But given the quality of image here and the fact I was just able to snap it, I'm guessing it was from the 20-inch. So that was, we've transitioned to a new device now, which is the iPhone 6 there, and its aperture improved, so it's able to actually capture more light in a single image as well. So it's an f2.2. And the aperture is something they've tried to improve more and more over the years, so you'll see that as we progress more further and further. Oh, I can't see the shutter speed. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and shrink that. Maybe I can put it up there. There we go. I don't think there's much information that'll show up there, but I'll try and keep an eye on my webcam view. So it is. Yep. Now you should be able to see those. If we want to see any of the other stuff. There's the early Orion Nebula. I think that I'll show you this one again just to show you the shutter speed is 1/15th of a second. That was the highest level that you could go on the default camera app. There was that other one. I didn't have much success though using that early sort of manual exposure app, so I didn't really use it much for deep sky data capture. Oh. I gotta remember to hit that transition button, because otherwise it won't work. Okay, let's go back to the Orion Nebula then. There you go, 1/15 of a second for the Orion Nebula. So now we can get into sort of some special events here. This was the 2015 lunar eclipse, and that was in September. Same device as before. The ISO was 320. Again, these are all automatic settings from the camera system. Again, the aperture has been improved, and I for this picture I did bump the shutter speed up all the way, or at least the exposure level. Like if you know when you go into your camera, the default camera app in iOS, there's that little sun button or sun level, which is effectively the exposure level that you can move up and down. So you can adjust it in that sense, but it really doesn't give you any immediate information on it. It's just a very simple way to adjust the exposure levels. Okay, carrying on here. Now the cool thing about this, before I move on, is that when I bumped up the shutter speed or the exposure levels, I was able to see the eyepiece view, which is sort of a limiting factor of smartphone astrophotography. Is if you're taking pictures through a telescope, you're almost always going to have that eyepiece frame, that circular frame. Whereas if you hook a camera sensor directly up to a telescope, the entire sensor is being exposed to whatever object you're looking at, and you get a full frame view. Here you're being cut off by the field of view of the eyepiece. Okay, carrying on. So this one I sort of named the Ecliptic in Action from 2015. And maybe some of you recognize that structure there. That is, in fact, Spaceship Earth from Disney World in Epcot. And I sort of thought it was neat. You know, you have Spaceship Earth here, and you also have, I think this is Venus, and this one might be Jupiter, if I remember correctly. And then when we were returning to our hotel, I think from that evening, walking out, and I saw those. So I lined it up, and it looked pretty neat. And then when we got to back to the hotel, they were all in a line. So you have the moon down here, you have Venus, you have let's see, this might be Mars. It's dim like Mars, so I'm guessing it's Mars, and then up here is Jupiter. So you have them. It was a really good display of the ecliptic, just shooting out of the Earth like that, all straight in a line, really fairly close together in the sky. So I snapped that shot, and again, the significance of this is wide field astrophotography. So because the aperture was improved at f2.2, the ISO is could reach a little bit higher. Now this information is for this picture specifically. This one I just decided not to include because it would have been lower ISO and higher, a faster shutter speed. Anyways, so this is more intriguing because it's a darker sky. So the shutter speed was as slow as it could go, and the ISO was bumped up quite a bit as well. Not maximum though. I think the maximum for this device was still 3200. But I think because the moon was there was enough light coming off that it didn't maximize. Okay, carrying on here, we have the 2017 solar eclipse. And this was August 21st, 2017. Now this is when the moon passed in front of the sun, whereas before with the lunar eclipse, that was the Earth getting in the path of, in between the moon and the sun. So you have Earth projecting its shadow onto the moon in a lunar eclipse. In a solar eclipse, you have the moon projecting its shadow on the Earth. So that was the case here. And you can just about see the moon edging along there on the sun. Now this was taken directly from my smartphone. However, I used the solar glasses that you can get for safe viewing, safe direct viewing of the sun during eclipses. You never want to look at the sun directly during the partial eclipses here. So you got to wear glasses to do that. Now I was able to just hold my phone up and take a picture through the glasses to get that view. So this is directly from the smartphone camera, not through any telescope. So this was, again, moving to another device, and that was the iPhone 7 here, and that aperture had an f1.8. So again, improving the light capture ability. Not super useful for this scenario, but it would be for the dimmer stuff. This was still, even through those glasses, still plenty of light coming through. You can see the ISO was set at 25. So the software clearly thought, oh, there's plenty of light coming through those glasses still when I was snapping that photo. And the shutter speed here was also set pretty fast. So clearly there was enough information for it to determine, yeah, we'll bring this quite a ways down. Now, I was also able to photograph through a telescope here at Copernicus, because that's where I was this day. Really nice day for this eclipse. We were really happy with the results there. And I was able to snap this through a scope, and you should be able to see the sunspots. We had a really nice batch of sunspots across the surface that day, which is even better for an eclipse because you can sort of see the moon occlude those, pass in front of them, and cover them up as the moon. Now, we didn't get a total eclipse here. You would have had to have traveled further down south to get that. And 2024, though, we'll get nearly a total eclipse in this area. I think it's like 97% covered, but just a bit north, it'll be totality. But this was still pretty nice. This wasn't maximum coverage. I think maximum for us was like 2/3 that day. But this is still before those sunspots were covered up from our perspective. So really nice view there. And you can, if you look carefully on the edge of the moon here, you can see some of the mountains and ridges, again, denoting that it's not a smooth surface. It's very mountainous, just like here on Earth. Okay. Now, in case you're wondering, sunspots are these magnetic disturbances on the sun. A lot of times they come in pairs, like you'd expect for a magnet having a north and south pole. Okay, let's keep going here. How are we doing on time? Well, not too bad. Okay, we started a little bit later, so I'm doing okay. So an unaided lunar image using a built-in telephoto. So I think we're going to transition to another device here. And when I say unaided, that means I did not take this picture using a telescope. It was strictly through, just like the solar eclipse image before, using the filter glasses. This was just holding my phone up to the sky. I don't even think I had it on a tripod. Because you're able to use a quick shutter speed. You don't really need a tripod. The camera is just going to snap a quick frame before you really even move. So I was able to get detail on the moon with just my phone. And that's not something you really were able to do before they started adding telephoto lenses. So now modern smartphones, a lot of them come with like a 2x or a 5x telephoto lens. This was like a 2x telephoto. And I was able to zoom in enough optically. Digital zoom doesn't really help you there. You need an optical zoom in optically enough to resolve some detail on the moon at a high enough shutter speed or a quick enough exposure. So again, the ISO didn't need to be high because there's a lot of light coming off the moon. No need to bump up the noise there. The aperture was on a lot of telephotos are going to be rather smaller. So it's not going to collect as much light, but that's okay again for a bright object. And because it's the moon, you can just take a quick shutter speed, take a quick snapshot, and get a lot of detail out of that one frame. Now, it's not perfect. You can definitely see it's a little bit fuzzy, and you're not going to be able to make out any of the smaller craters. I don't even know if you can make out Tycho, for that matter. I don't see Tycho on that. I just see the contrast. That's really what it picked up, was the contrast of the seas, or the mare, across the moon, and the brighter patches of the mountains and the craters. Okay, carrying on. Now let's talk about the advent of night mode. Let me know in the chat if you've used night mode before on your smartphone, because this is where things really get interesting. So night mode is a feature on your phone that was added in the past couple of years. It's a fairly modern smartphone feature where it's a mix of better sensors, better optics, and machine learning. Machine learning is a big aspect of it. Smartphone processors only recently became fast enough where software can be used to process the image on top of whatever better sensors you have. So it's a combination of those two features, the better camera itself and the ability to use computation to pull out more detail out of photos. This is an example of the Orion Nebula here, which I think we had in our thumbnail for today's program. So this is the Orion Nebula from January 17th. Really not that long ago. I remember I was out in the dome. This was when we were still doing in-person programs at the time, and I think people were in here during the presentation, and I was just seeing what I could do with not the new phone and the adapter I had recently gotten as well, so I could just mount my phone to the telescope, which again I will show you. This was now. Let me actually make a couple of points here. The ISO really bumped up with this upgrade. So the sensor became a lot more sensitive to light when you needed it to be. Again, that means more noise, but it also means you can collect dimmer detail. So you were able to really bump it up high there to 12,500 ISO. The aperture, again, is that 1.8, so still a pretty decent amount of light collecting ability there. And it says the shutter speed is 1 second, which I was surprised to find in the metadata. But it might just be the way it treats the night mode exposures, because I am fairly certain this was like a 30-second night mode exposure, but that might translate to something different in terms of the overall shutter speed of the frame you captured. So while it says it's 1 second, but the night mode, when I actually ran through and took the exposure, was a 30-second exposure. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but I assume it has something to do with the way it processes the image. So that's there's quite a bit of detail though in that view. Again, compared to what we saw earlier, where we just saw the trapezium. This was through the 6-inch refractor as well that we've done a lot of our streams on. Through the 20-inch, I imagine you'd be able to even capture quite a bit more of the detail on Orion. But you're getting quite a bit here. You're getting the hydrogen cloud structure around the upper star here, as well as the distinction between the blue star, the reflecting nebula, rather, and the hydrogen ionization in this glowing nebula, which is the purple hue. And and then you're getting the dark, dusty clouds around the outside. Okay, keep going here. Again, this also helped us observe Comet Neowise. When we were just starting out these observing live streams, we didn't really have a good way to capture wide field stuff yet. That came a little later when I was able to get use a mirrorless camera and send that through our live stream. It's too bad though, because if it would have been perfect for Comet Neowise. But we made do with what we had, and I was able to just use my smartphone for that stream, and you can go back and watch that. That's still on YouTube now. But this is what we have for Comet Neowise. So it's not bad. It's fuzzy compared to what you'd get through a mirrorless camera. And again, I assume that's through the processing that's done through the default camera app. I don't even think I was able to take this as a raw photo yet, based on the application I was using, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But for those who know raw image formats, so the ISO was set at 10,000. Again, aperture is the same. We're not changing that unless we switch to like the telephoto camera. And then the shutter speed was again that sort of weird 1 second, but really it was a 30-second exposure. And you can watch me take these pictures live if you go back to the stream that we did on July 17th. This was during the stream that we took this photo. And again, yes, Linda, this was through our 6-inch refractor. We were observing this phenomena. I did take a picture of Comet Neowise with my phone just as a landscape shot. I think in the early morning I was able to get one, but they just look like sort of fuzzballs in the sky, which I mean in some ways that's what they are, especially to your eye. But the DSLRs and mirrorless cameras were able to capture so much more detail in those. So this ended up being a really the best view we could get, and it's also sort of neat to see the stars behind the tail there, coming through the sky. I thought that was a neat look, which you'd also be able to do if you were getting it through a telescope or something with a regular DSLR or mirrorless camera. But this was doing enough where we could make out that detail. So again, this is Comet. I'll move my head out of the way here for a second. This is Comet Neowise. You can do a search for that. Oh yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, Lou. Yeah, you can see the green color on the nucleus there too. I think as we went through the streams later in the coming days, as Neowise moved through the sky and also did continue to dim a bit after passing around the sun, that green nucleus became more apparent as the rest sort of started to fade away. But you can see the green nucleus there from the ionization of that gas, which is really cool. Bring my view back up the top there. So that's Comet Neowise, our most recent bright comet flying through the sky. Now I have a couple of comparison shots to talk about. We have this shot of, let me make sure it's coming through okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. This shot of the constellation Orion. Even the Orion Nebula is going to show up a bit in this image. This was taken at Copernic. You can see our nice tree line there. Our sundial's right over here. These are pitch dark skies in this case. The only light I have to use is the red light coming off our building here, which of course isn't useful for the sky, but it is nice just to have the building glow a little bit to add a little bit of detail in the foreground as you look out into the dark sky there. This image would not have been possible like a decade ago with a smartphone. You need this new era of computational photography and the better sensors and the better optics to actually get to this level of detail in the sky. I have more to say about the wide field, but I'll hold off a moment because I have another slide that's going to focus more on that. So let's compare it to almost the exact same image from a Sony a7 III, which is the mirrorless camera we use in our wide field live streams, like when we did Orion a little while back. So here is the same, basically the same picture, but again with the Orion Nebula. So we can, again, let's go to the optometrist. 1 or 2? 1 or 2? Well, of course, 2 is the clearer and better view here. But, I mean, compared to, like, you know, just if you're considering, like, oh, what do I have on me at the time? I just want to see if I can snap a quick picture of the sky and get some nice detail. It's not terrible. It's noisy, and it's a little bit, you're getting a lot of strange hues, a lot of strange color shifts in the, especially towards the bottom near the tree line there. But you're capturing detail in the sky that you otherwise would not be able to. And we'll talk about how this is even improving. This has improved even just in the last 6 months when we go to the next slide. But the point is, like, we're getting progress here, and I imagine this progress is going to continue. You have a limiting factor, though, of course. You have the limiting factor of the small sensor and of the small optics. But you can offset that through the software, which is really the point of this. And yes, that's a good point too. I just caught in the chat here that there is more sky glow in the A7 III shot because of the amount of light it's able to collect comparatively. So depending on what you're looking for, I mean, do you want high contrast stars like this and maybe a little bit more focused on the Orion Nebula, or do you want all the stars like you're seeing there? Orion is still shining through pretty nice though, and you are capturing a lot more detail in the Orion Nebula compared to this shot where it's really just kind of like a fuzzy star. But here you're actually, you can make out some of the initial bright clouds there. I think this would have been a 30-second exposure as well as this. Okay, and we're going to compare the earliest wide field, which we saw earlier, to I think the title image that we started with, and I'll talk about where those came from. So again, this one was just that early like attempt on an iPhone to try and capture. I think it again was back in 2012, 2013 timeframe. Try and capture the stars in the sky. I am just making out Orion here. Just making out where the Orion Nebula would be, sort of like an imprint, but no discernible detail, and just the overall structure of the constellation, and some of the stars surrounding it. We are not nearly getting to the point of any of the dimmer stars showing up. They are just completely lost to noise. So really only the bright stuff would show. And here is that image we started with, which I took, let's see, this would have been, I think if you were tuning in during the Orion stream, I stepped outside and took this shot because I had enough forethought to realize I wanted to do a program like this. So I went out and grabbed a few shots with that. And it's pretty decent. It's even better than that initial shot we got of Orion with basically the same camera system, the same smartphone. You're still getting the Orion Nebula there. It's actually showing up pretty nice and bright. Again, not a lot of detail compared to the Sony camera, but clearer than this shot for sure. There's nothing there, and clearer than even the other shot. You're getting a lot more stars as well, and a fair amount of noise and discoloration too. And in part, that was the way I decided to edit it, because I wanted to bring out as many stars in this image as I could, stars that were actually stars and not just noise. And in doing that, it affected the foreground here with the trees. It made that area super noisy. So it's a give and take with these wide field images with a smartphone, but you can get a lot of detail out of them. Again, Taurus the Bull is showing nice in the sky there. We have Sirius showing over here in Canis Major. Okay, keep going here. So there was a lot of progress in wide field. So at this point, though, I want to talk about how you can get started with wide field astrophotography. So we're moving into how you can go about this with your own devices at home. So the first thing I want to mention is you do need a fairly modern smartphone that has a night mode. And night modes did start even a few years back. They started being added to smartphones, but the early night modes really weren't terribly effective. So you want something probably within the last 2 years. So I added a few examples of things that have a decent night mode added to them. So you're looking at things like a Pixel 3, 4, or 5, an iPhone 11 or 12, recent Samsung Galaxies like Samsung Galaxy S, maybe I think the S10 had it for sure. One of the better ones that used good computational programs to get some quality out of the images. Then, of course, anything after that, S20, S21. And those are the devices you can expect to have a decent night mode on them. I know the Android devices, especially anything that can run the Google Camera app, although I think the Pixels are supposed to technically have the better version. It's been better calibrated to that that phone's camera sensor. So they actually have a specific astrophotography mode that runs once it detects that it's stable and it's looking out into the night sky, which is really, really cool. I haven't personally used it, which is in part this getting started section is going to be skewed more towards iPhone, but I suspect that this could turn more into a series of basically tips and tricks that we can add to the channel over time to get you started on either device. So if we ever get access to an Android device, we would definitely provide that information to you in addition to whatever is on iOS. So a tripod is not required, but I strongly recommend it for wide field photography. You can capture the stars with just holding your phone up to the sky. I was even I didn't include them in this slideshow just because I didn't want it to be droning on forever on the night sky images I have. But I was able to just hold my phone up one time and capture Sagittarius and the Milky Way. It didn't look super great or anything, but it showed up in the photo just by holding my phone up to the sky. So it's possible, but you're going to get way more quality if you have something to stabilize your phone with. But that self-stabilization is run through the software, so that's why they can actually, you can just hold it up and it will stabilize for you. But again, tripod is the better way to go about this. Just like, you wouldn't want to hold your mirrorless camera up to the sky and try and take a 30-second exposure. It just wouldn't work. So a tripod, and you can just get an adapter that hooks your phone into a tripod mount. Those are relatively cheap and easy to find. As far as just when you want to take these pictures, you just want to wait an hour or so after sunset. In the summertime, you end up waiting a bit longer, maybe 90 minutes after sunset to get nice dark skies. If your whole goal is to take images of the stars, get away from the moon. That's one thing I've noticed even with these modern devices. With a mirrorless camera, you might, even though it'll be totally overexposed by moonlight, you might be able to still pull out starlight. It's not so much the case with smartphones. Just the way the processing is done, the post-processing is done in the photo after you've taken the picture, it will pretty much neglect all of that starlight and just treat it as a uniform gradient across the sky of gray from all that moonlight. So darker skies are better for smartphone astrophotography when you're taking pictures of constellations and whatnot. Then you want to find a clear patch of the sky. So just like anything, if you're watching a meteor shower, wherever there's a clear patch, that's where you want to look. Same thing with a smartphone. Just find your clear patch in the sky and start taking some pictures. And it really is as simple as point and shoot. That's the nice part about so much being done on through the software now, and everything being so automated is you have the chance to just focus on the framing of the shot, take the picture, and go from there. And then you can add to your skills over time and practice more with manual apps that give you more control over that. But that's not what this program's about tonight. It's mostly just getting you started on where to go to take your first astrophotos. Okay. So for Android devices, because I don't have experience with modern Android devices myself, I decided to just, they have a pretty good list of procedure items to go through when you're trying to take astrophotos. You can actually look this up. So I've effectively just taken their procedure and modified it a bit for how I understand taking astrophotos with my phone. But there's a Google Camera app that they recommend you use. There is something called the night sight button, and it really, just like the iOS night sight or night mode button, it is a moon. It's just a crescent moon. So you want to look for that and click on night sight. With the Google Camera app, though, there's two levels to night sight mode. The night sight mode, the primary one, is just used for when you're in dark conditions. So if you're just trying to take a picture, what's a good example? Well, just if you're in the city at night and you're just taking pictures in darker environments there, that's where it's just going to do like a quick, like maybe 2 to 3 second exposure and stabilize the image and then post-process it, and you'll end up with quite a bit of detail. In fact, the images I've seen pulled from the Google Camera app are astounding for just night sight. So that's one option. But if you're looking for astrophotography, that's where you want to use a tripod, prop it up somewhere, or hold the phone as steady as you can. Although, again, really it's better use a tripod. And aim at starry skies. You look at the screen and you wait a few seconds to see how the phone reacts. It should eventually transition to the astrophotography mode that's built into the app, at which point you are free to take the picture, but you just have to wait for that command to come up that says astrophotography on. And then you really just, I think the shutter button becomes that moon symbol, and you just tap that, and that'll take the picture for you. and you don't move the phone, and it's going to start a countdown process. So during that countdown procedure, don't move it. It's doing all the work it needs to do to capture the stars for you. So leave it be until it counts down, and then you're good to go. You have your image. It'll probably take like 5 seconds at most to do its post-processing, but I doubt even that. The processors in smartphones are so quick, it really doesn't take much time to do the processing it needs to on the photo. Okay, carrying on. So that's for Android devices. Let's go to iOS now. Again, these are both, I think on the Google Pixels, it would be the Google camera would be like the default built-in camera app. Same thing for iOS. We're strictly sticking to what you can do just by the default app. Later on, when we can do more programs or quick videos on what apps are out there that you can really dig into the details about or change the manual settings directly rather than having iOS or Google determine that for you. I think the Google Camera app might actually have built-in manual settings, but iOS does not. It does not have manual adjustments. It's all handled through software and through automation, which is not ideal. But again, we can talk more later about other apps that you can use. I've had good success with the built-in camera app in general. So that's why I just stuck with it, keep things simpler for today. The app will automatically determine if there are dark conditions, and it turns on night mode by itself. You do have a bit of manual control over how long of an exposure you can take. So I think this is where the automation side of things, you're limited on how specific you can get. So you can turn it off completely. You can, if it's dark, super dark outside and you're just taking pictures of stars, you can do a 5-second exposure, or you can bump it up all the way to 30 seconds. Depending on the conditions, it might switch down to like something like 0, 5, and 10 rather than 0, 5, and 30. But you do not have granular control. Like you can't set it to like, I want to do a 3-second or I want to do a 12-second. It doesn't work like that in the built-in, the default app. So I actually want to take some time to show you that process. Now, we can't do it with the dark skies outside just because there's no stars to see. But I can, well, maybe we can even simulate it with turning off the lights in the room, and I can show you the night mode in that way. And I can at least show you how to control it if you're unfamiliar with that. So I'm going to have to move the camera down to this table here so you can see that process play out. One more tip I have for you, and I'm going to leave this up while I adjust the camera. If you go to settings, then you go to the camera settings, the formats. There's a section towards the bottom of the formats page that says Apple Pro RAW, and it should be one of those switch buttons that are very familiar to us on iOS. I would recommend to turn that option on, and you don't even have to run that option all the time. You can turn that on and off in the I think it'll be in the upper right corner. I'll show you on the screen, but it'll be in the upper right corner. You can turn it on and off. They just don't turn it on by default. So you have to go through and force that setting in phones that support it. Again, this might be something that's only supported in like the past 2 or 3 iPhones or something like that. But I recommend that because it's basically Apple's raw image format. And when you take a raw photo, you're collecting as much detail as possible. There's no processing done on the raw image itself. The interesting thing about Apple Pro RAW is it processes the image, but it saves all the raw data too. So the image that it spits out when you've hit the shutter and the capture button, the image it spits out is the processed image. But when you go into editing, it'll switch over to the raw image, and you can make your adjustments from there. And that image I took of the wide-angle view of Orion was actually from an Apple Pro RAW, and I was able to pull out so much more stellar detail because I used the RAW format rather than just the processed image. That processed image assumes there's a lot of noise there. The starlight is noise, and it just gets rid of it rather than keeping it for you. So that's my recommendation. I'll leave those settings up if you want to go explore that. Let me switch over to the camera view on the table here so you can see what I'm doing on my phone. And I promise we'll get to questions in just a few minutes. Actually, maybe I can just do it right here on the table. I think that's a possibility. Sorry if there's a lot of rickety noise here. As I get this set up. Okay. All right, let me turn on this here. All right, we should be good. I think I have it framed how I'd like. So let's switch over to the camera now. Yeah, that should work. Okay. So I think yep, that's still on. You should be able to still hear me, and you should be able to see this. Let's see if I can get it to autofocus to the phone here. There we go. So let me go ahead and show you where you find that camera setting too. So you're just in the general settings app. You go down to camera here. Not sure why it's not keeping focused on the image. Seems to like to switch. All right, then you scroll. You're in the camera array. You go to formats at the top, and then you see this section called Apple Pro RAW, and you just switch that on to get the raw image data on top of what Apple does in the processing. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So let me go back here. We'll do it again. So let's see. So you scroll down. There's this huge list of settings now. You scroll all the way down to camera. And then you go to format. And then you go down to Apple Pro RAW. And that will, you flip that little green switch there, or it should go green when it's turned on, and that'll turn on the raw image data for you. So that's one thing you can do. Let's go over to the camera app now, and you should see up in the upper right hand corner there, again, if it would just stay focused. I don't know why it doesn't want to. There we go. There's a little section called RAW. So it's off right now. You just tap it and it turns it on. So that when it's on like that, it's going to capture both the processed data and it's going to capture all of the raw data, all of the sensor information that was captured in your frame. So I'll turn that off for now. Okay, so you can see there's no night sight on right now. You have no indication of it being turned on. There's no indication down in your tool section here either, where you have flash adjustments and live photo and aspect ratio, things like that. So what you have to do is get into a dark environment for iOS to automatically detect that you have a dark environment to take a night photo. So you see, as soon as I put my hand in front of the lens, there's that little circle that pops up in the upper left corner. That is night mode. That means it's detecting low light environment, and you can see how immediate it is. It is impressive. Detecting low light environment, so it's saying, oh, maybe we should take a long exposure. So when you have that night mode icon, you can tap it, and at the bottom, when you tap that button, you get this slider. And this slider lets you select how long of a exposure you want to take. And it automatically sets it for you, so I could just take a 2-second exposure shot of my hand is what it's saying right now. 2 second there. I can also slide it back to turn it off so you don't get night mode at all, or I can slide it forward, and it's saying based on the stability of the shot, the maximum it could do is 4 seconds. So it will automatically adjust based on the maximum, based on the stability of the framed shot. Right now I'm holding it and I'm shaking it around a bunch, so it's not going to go any further than 4 seconds, but it can max out at 30 if you put it on a tripod. So I think it might be worth trying, at least just to show you the effect night mode has. I will try a shot, just a shot without night mode turned on in the dark room here, and then I'll turn it on and we'll see if we can collect more data and get a brighter image. I am going to sort of simulate this with some ambient light, so I might leave the back lights on, or I might let the light from the other room turn on. But let me go turn those off and we'll see what we can do. How does that look on the camera? Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty dark. Yeah, so if we pan the shot, I'm going to pan our camera over here. You can look at, you might be able to just make out Comet Hale-Bopp there. Even this camera is not doing terribly. But, there we go. Let's halt it there. And I'll hold my phone back up here. And we're going to take a shot first with, actually that's showing up really nicely, isn't it? Already, just in the live feed. I wonder if we can even reduce this more. Let's turn off the backlights too. We might be getting too much light. All right. Wow, it might even require me to turn off this light over here. Yeah, now we're getting a really high ISO. I can already tell just by the noise of the image. So now it's really dark. You're barely seeing anything, but you can see my phone now. And you can see even still, right now, it's looking pretty decent in the live field of view here. So let's turn off night mode completely, though. Switch it off. And we're just going to take one snapshot with night mode turned off. Again, you can see at the bottom there, it's turned off. So that's night mode turned off. Now let's go turn it on to a 3-second exposure. You can see down at the bottom, it's set for 3. Hold my hand as steady as I can. Okay. Let's take one more at 3 seconds. That's what it's automatically set to. It's saying, yeah, I could probably pick up enough light at 3 seconds. So we'll leave it at 3. Then you can max it out at 10 if you really want to try and collect as much light as possible. So there you go. It went from sliding it over from 3 here, sliding it to the right to 10. And now hit the capture button. You got to hold it as steady as possible. It's telling me at the top to hold still. I can already tell I'm shaking a little bit during the image capture, but it does give you a little crosshair at the center to let you know how far off you've moved from center in the image. I did quite a bit, so let me see if I can stabilize myself a little better here. Try one more time at 10 seconds. Okay, not bad. Let's see what we have. Start at front here. So again, this isn't perfect. Perfect way to display our capturing of the image through the webcam here, but we do what we gotta do. This is the shot with no night mode. Again, no night mode there, no night mode there. I took a few shots. There's the 3 second shot. So again, look at the difference there. No night mode, 3 second night mode. And then we'll keep going all the way. Actually, you know, as I look at it, I'm not sure we got much benefit from the 10 second beyond maybe lower noise levels. That might have been what we got from it. I'd have to look at that in more detail to see if that was in fact the case. But otherwise, the 3 second and the 10 second seem to be enough based on the light that was in the room. We're getting the light that you're seeing reflecting in the back there off the wall is coming from our lobby where the lights are still on. They're coming through the doorway in the front of our auditorium room. Or space science, if you've been to Copernic before. So it's pretty good. Like, I would say the best comparison is just looking at the no night mode versus night mode. And you can see just how much light you can collect there. All right, let me turn my lights back on so I can see again. Okay. And we will... actually, while I have the camera set up, I want to talk about, I have slides for this, but I want to show you while the camera is looking at the table here, or going to be looking at the table, I want to show you the other material we have. So let me set that up, and why don't we go... Yeah, let's go to this, transition back to that, because now we want to talk about how to capture the planets and the moon. I know you can't see me, but that's okay. You don't necessarily need to right now. We'll switch back to the camera view when I have the items to show you. So, first thing, planets, you definitely need a telescope. There's no way around that. The moon, you can, like we saw earlier, I took that freehand shot of the moon with just the telephoto lens on my smartphone. But again, not a lot of detail there. So even the moon, I'd recommend at least a small telescope. But planets, you need a decently sized one to start capturing some good detail. That Saturn image in the thumbnail that we saw earlier was captured through a scope, and it was captured through image stacking. So there was a little bit more processing going on there. I'm holding off on talking more about that for today, just because this program would turn into like a 2 or 3 hour event. So we're going to do more programs about this, I think, and we can talk more about how you can get started with stacking and whatnot. But we'll hold off on that. So a tracking telescope is even better, and that's a type of telescope where where it'll move with the sky. And there's a couple different versions of that. I'm just making the quick point here that a tracking telescope would be useful if you know how, or if you have one. That's the better way to go about taking these pictures. That way you don't have to keep readjusting the telescope as the sky moves on you, or as the Earth moves on you, really. Okay. I recommend too an eyepiece phone mount. We talked earlier about how you can use, you can just hold up your phone, or you can attach a phone adapter to the eyepiece. And that way it's just mounted to the telescope. You don't have to touch the phone or move the phone at all and move with the telescope. It's all just one piece all together. So I have a couple of examples here. The first one came from our director, and let me see if I can switch back to my webcam. There we go. So this one is just a 2-axis adapter. Well, I guess it might even, yeah. So you effectively attach this section to the eyepiece. So this more circular section gets attached to the eyepiece. And then this section is where your phone goes. So I can take my phone out here. And you can just slot it in and then tighten it up using this screw, this thumb screw here. And then effectively, I guess it's really a 1-axis adapter. No, it's a. Well, I guess yeah, you can adjust here. Yeah, it is 2-axis. So you can unscrew this and you can slide it back and forth depending on where you need it to go. So you can move it up and down there, or you can adjust where the camera sensor is going to be along this section. So basically the eyepiece would be hovering right in there somewhere, and you could adjust up and down and rotation, so where the sensor hovers over the eyepiece. So that's one option you have. And these are a bunch of different brands make these ones. They're all over. So you can just do a quick search for telescope phone adapter, and I'm sure you can find what you need on that front. The one I've used in the past, like for the NeoWise live stream, is this one here. This actually comes from Celestron. It's their Celestron makes one like this too, and also not a sponsor. I'm just going to mention that. Our only sponsor for today is Broom Pediatrics. So this is just the model I use, and I think it's called the Celestron. I had it up on the slide, and I'll go back to that eventually, but it's the Celestron NexYZ 3-axis smartphone adapter. And this is really nice if you need to narrow down a perfect point in the eyepiece for the camera to hover over. So you can just slot your phone right into the phone mount section. Oops, I have it in reverse. Slot in there, like so. And then you have several knobs here that will rotate it in the X, Y, and Z axis. So this one here moves the phone in and out. So right now the eyepiece section here is moving, but when it's mounted to an eyepiece, of course, the phone itself would be moving. So this is moving in and out. Then you have this knob here to move it. You could say that's along the x-axis. This one you can say is along the y-axis. So we have our y, we have our x, shifting it back and forth, left to right, in and out, and then this last knob here will move it up and down in the z-axis. So it's really great for narrowing down, especially if you have a variety of phone sensors that you'd like to use in non-pandemic times, this is something that we could use just to hook onto the telescope. People can still freely look in the eyepiece, but if they want to take a picture, you can pop your phone in here, and you can just take a quick snapshot. This was something fairly new that I had just before the pandemic, so we didn't really get to try it out that much as far as public goes. But it's something we'd consider in the future. Okay, so I want to show you how they hook up to the scope, though, and I have a Dobsonian telescope out here that we can use for that. So I'll pan the camera around over here, and we can take a look at this process with a Dobsonian reflector. So this is just a swivel telescope. Move it back a bit so we can see the entire thing. A swivel mount scope. So the scope moves on its base here. Let's go a bit down. There we go. Moves on its base, swivels on its base, and moves up and down in altitude. Really nice basic scope, and really nice for observing planets too, because they're often wide aperture, so you can see the mirror system at the base there. And well, also the secondary mirror up at the top. Okay, so we have an eyepiece right here. That is our target for putting the sensor of the camera, the smartphone camera, over. So we'll pop this adapter on, and you do have to tighten it on there. There's a little orange screw that you can use to tighten the eyepiece holder onto the eyepiece. I think I can get a better view of that here. All tangled up. There we go. There you go. So now you can see the mount is hooked onto the eyepiece, and then you just slot your phone. Now, if you just wanted to observe, you can bring the mount in, and you can just hover your eye over the eyepiece, make sure the phone is out, or I think you even bring it down too, a bit more. Yeah, so you can really get the phone mount section out of the way just to do visual observing, so it's not bothering you. Or you could just slot your phone right in. We'll bring it out away from the eyepiece to start. And then you can just bring it, let's see if I can get the camera up here. It might come through on your end there, but you could just bring it and hover it, get it lined up just right using the 3 axes knobs. Bring it up a little bit more, off to the side here. Yep, we're about lined up. Get a little further. And that's pretty good. You'd probably start to see the object in the eyepiece right about there. So this is a fantastic adapter for really narrowing it down. The other one, effectively, it's similar process. You just have 2 axes to work with rather than like that rotational axis and the side-to-side one to pinpoint that zone. So otherwise, it's effectively the same idea. You just mount it first to the eyepiece, and then you mount your phone. I recommend it in that order in case anything goes wrong in the mounting process and the whole thing falls apart. I'm not speaking from experience, I promise. Okay, so that is mounting the system to your telescope if you have one. Let's go back here. I'm going to go back to that presentation here. And then I promise I will get to any questions. So if you asked a question earlier on and and I didn't answer it, go ahead and post your questions again in the chat just so they're more recent, and I will get to those at the end of the program here. Okay. So the last point I have for you is that you can record video through your camera app and use that in image stacking, just like you would if you had a webcam or if you had like the ZWO cameras that we've used in our planetary streams. It's the same idea. The dealing with the video format is a little bit tricky, and it's another thing I can show you another time. Image stacking is more involved, so we'll hold off on that and do it in a more advanced video later on. So that's the planets, and the planets are brighter. Like Jupiter and Saturn are brighter objects, so you're going to have to bring down your exposure levels a bit on your camera. And again, for iPhone, that's just this. I can show you quick now that I have the camera set up effectively. Actually, I can show you a couple of quick tips here that are handy for taking iPhone planetary photos. So first thing is when you tap the screen, you get this square icon, right? That's your focus icon. It also sets exposure levels depending on, like automatically sets them depending on what point of the screen you clicked to bring out detail in that particular part of the image, because that's the area you'd want to focus on, right? So that square is for focus and for automatic exposure. You can't adjust your focus manually unless you have another app, sadly. But then you have this little sunlight, sun symbol rather. And that's just to adjust the exposure, the brightness. So you can slide that up, or you can slide that down. And for the moon, you're going to want to slide that way down to the bottom. Then if you have something dim in the sky, like maybe you'd be able to get a globular cluster or something, or the nebulas, you might want to bring that up higher. But it really is situational, and for planetary stuff, you're going to want to go way to the bottom. And in this case, then you just want to go to something like video mode. And here you can, up in the upper right-hand corner, you can adjust your resolution and frame rate settings. I usually go for, if I can show you here, if it would focus, come on, focus. Focus. Okay, fine. Anyways, there's resolution settings. So there's 4K and then there's 60 in this case. I usually push it to the highest frame rate I can, and the 4K isn't super necessary because you're already dealing with a low quality view because you're peering through so much of our atmosphere. It's not super necessary. So you could probably bring that down just to standard HD. That way you're not dealing with such big video files. And then you can just hit record, and you can take a video to use for stacking later, or you could just take snapshots, and that works fine too. Either way. Okay, so that's planetary imaging. Again, it's a mixture of, go back to that slide, a mixture of using a telescope, using an eyepiece mount, and anything you can do to improve your quality of image, like using a tracking telescope, doing image stacking if you're familiar with that. Those are all good options. You could do image stacking on the moon or the planets. Either one, you're going to improve your image substantially. All right, so let me know if you have questions about capturing planets in the moon. Let's go on to uncovering the deep sky. Now, the cool part about this section is it's really just a mix of everything that we've learned so far about smartphone astrophotography. So it's a mix of the prior methods. You use an eyepiece adapter to hold the smartphone in place for a telescope because you're really not going to do much deep sky imaging with just handheld or tripod-based photography from your phone. You can get the Orion Nebula, and I've seen some pretty decent attempts at resolving some detail just from using your phone, but it's limited. It's better just to hook it up to a telescope and see what you can do there. So again, use an eyepiece adapter like we just showed. A simple one works just fine. You can get the XYZ axis one, and that works great too. And then you use night mode in this case to capture a long exposure of an object. So this is a combination of the wide field stuff we talked about, where you're taking long, like 30-second exposures. You don't do that with the planets because they're too bright. You have no use for night mode on those objects unless you're trying to get, like the dim moons around Saturn or something. Then maybe you want to try that. But otherwise, Saturn and Jupiter are too bright. The moon is too bright. You're going to want to lower the exposure, like I showed you there. On here, the objects are so dim, you're going to want to up your exposure settings. That means activating night mode and ultimately going as high as you can go, which is that 30-second. This is not something that'll work well trying to hold your phone over the eyepiece. Unless you have a really steady hand and a good tracking telescope, you need an adapter for this to do it effectively. And again, this is somewhere you can take multiple exposures and stack them afterwards, and you'll definitely improve the noise levels of the final image and get an overall higher quality photograph of like whatever deep sky object you've imaged. So I've done the night mode, the night mode procedure on galaxies, on star clusters, on nebula. They've all worked pretty well, given that you're getting this information from a smartphone. You're getting this data from a smartphone. So like I took an image of the Whirlpool Nebula, and I was actually able to make out some decent spiral structure. Not as good as a mirrorless camera would be, but it's something if it's all you have to get you started. I was even able to take a picture of the supernova that happened in M51 recently. Well, I say recently, but really it's something that happened, millions and millions and millions of years ago. I'm not sure how far away M51 is off the top of my head. It might be a billion light year object. But I captured, it was fascinating. Like I was capturing starlight from supernova light from a galaxy so far away. And it was able to resolve some of the spiral structure of the galaxy on top of the supernova itself. So really fascinating what you can do with the modern smartphone sensors. That's not something that you could have done. It would have been way too dim. It's not something you could have done with sensors a decade ago on a phone. So again, deep sky, eyepiece adapter, and using night mode to capture longer exposures. That's the combo for you there. Now this was a overview of astrophotography with a smartphone. It was by no means a proper guide in the sense of really digging into the details of improving your astrophoto, processing it, stacking it if that's something you want to do. There are loads of ways to improve the final image. And it can be done just like you would do it on a mirrorless camera, just like you do it on a ZWO camera. It can be done on a smartphone. Not to the same effect. Those devices are, of course, more sensitive. There for a second. Hopefully it didn't cut out for too long. But that's the overview I have for the program for tonight. And I do hope to continue on in a similar vein, focusing on smartphones in the future. So let me know. Let's see. I want to make sure that this is still running here. If you can see me, I'm going to switch Is it going? It's not switching over on my feed. Oh, transition. There we go. Okay, it is going still. I don't have my audio hooked up, so I had no way to tell. For some reason, the software we're using told me the stream cut out and that it might not be streaming. So I wasn't sure. But we are still going, so let me turn the camera around so you can see me. And let me look at if there's any questions from tonight. There we go. So let's look at the chat here. That's a good point. Someone mentioned in the chat that they have the Celestron adapter that I showed you, the XYZ one, and they made a good point that it has metal gears, meaning you're not going to wear those gears over time as easy if they would be plastic. But more than that, it's also the rest is made of plastic, so it makes it lightweight for mounting to a telescope. And the nice part about this too is your iPhone is lightweight as well. So if you don't have a rig that can handle a lot of weight on top of the telescope that's already there, you can use a smartphone instead. And that'll lighten the load a bit. It can get you started on the path to astrophotography as you continue to invest in your telescopes and invest in your camera sensors. So that's a great way to start out. Great point there. Let's see, Douglas, how often do you use the zoom feature? So like the telephoto zoom, I don't use it a ton. It is helpful sometimes for the mounted astrophotography when you're looking through a telescope, because effectively the way at least Apple designed their telephoto lens is to sort of match reality. So the way we perceive the world, at our normal level, is it's supposed to sort of match that aspect of how we perceive the world directly through our eyes. Because the other, the regular camera is wider. It's a wider field of view. So that 2x zoom is supposed to better match that all. So like if you ever just hovered your camera sensor, your regular one, over an eyepiece, you notice it's zoomed out more than if you were able to just put your eye over it. The 2x zoom makes up for that. So I definitely use the optical zoom there. When I'm doing wide field imaging, I just use the regular sensor because the aperture is way better. It's 1.8 versus f2.2 or 2.4 in the telephoto. I can't remember exactly, but the aperture is way better in the newer sensor, or the regular sensor. Also, I think they did just recently add night mode to the telephoto and the ultra wides that are in the more modern phones, but before that, it was for a while. Night mode was exclusive to just the regular wide sensor. Good question. And Douglas also asks, have you tried time lapse? The thing about time lapse on the default camera app, at least, is night mode. I don't think exists as a option. Let me test that out quick, from what I've experienced at least. Yeah, you can adjust the exposure level, but you can't access a night mode, which is really unfortunate. So that means you can't have an intervalometer setting where you say, oh, I want to take a bunch of night mode shots at 30 seconds and then see how the sky changes. That'd be really cool. And there might be features out there on other apps, which I have yet to discover. I think there's something called Camera 2 Plus that I am interested in looking at because I've heard that they have a set exposure. So you have more granular control over it compared to the default camera app where you're just set, it's either automatic or you have 0510 or 0530, something like that. in options. So I want to look at that other app to see, and that's something I can report back on in another stream. Fred has a zinger here. I had to give up my career as a photographer because they kept losing focus. That's a good one. Oh, let's see. R. Moser asks, where do you access the metadata for the captured image? So Apple doesn't make it easy for you to find. In fact, I don't think there's a way to even look at it in the default iOS app. Let's see. No, I do not see a way to immediately look up the metadata in the iOS app. So what I've done is I've just put my images on either my PC or my Mac, and from there you can access any metadata without a problem. And there's a little information in the Photos app on Mac. There's a little information, little eye in the upper right-hand corner of that app that you can click on, and it'll show you metadata. On PC, you can of course just go into Properties and look at that information from there. So that's the way to get that metadata out of smartphone pictures. Android, I'm sure there's a way to access it directly on there, but it's just the way Apple locks down some information on iOS that prevents us from viewing it. So one of the negatives there. But let's see what else we have. And this one. Yeah, there might be apps on iOS that lets you, like photo viewing apps that let you access the metadata compared to Apple's just default Photos app. But for whatever reason, I can't find the metadata through there unless I'm on Mac in their Photos app. I'm going to scroll up a bit to see if I missed anything. Again, if you had a question that I missed, I will be happy to answer. I'll stay on for 5 more minutes to see if anything comes through, and I'll scroll up to see if I missed anything important. Moser also asked, would you need dew heaters in high humidity situations? That's one thing I've noticed with the smartphone cameras. They don't, because I assume it's just because the surface area of the lens is so small. I've never run into any dew problems on the smartphone directly on the lens. Now it's different if you're looking through a telescope, then you're going to run into some dew problems on the optics of the scope. But on the camera itself on the smartphone, I can say I've never run into a dew issue on the lens there. So if you're just doing wide field with your phone, no worries. Moser also asked a question about the more recent sensors on like the iPhone 12 Pro Max or the S21 Ultra. Yes, there is a new feature that seems to be making its way out into those sensors called sensor shift stabilization. So on top of your optical lens shifting stabilization, some modern smartphones are getting an additional stabilization on the sensor itself. So that means any issues with stability can be mitigated, at least smaller issues. So potentially, at least as it relates to night mode, you could prevent any sort of star trailing in your image, and maybe get even longer exposures through night mode just by holding it up to the sky and getting some more quality images quicker. But obviously it's going to be limited regardless. But it is nice for just general nighttime photos. It might not be as applicable into astrophotography, but I don't have that sensor shift on this phone here. So I have been unable to test that myself to see if it is a dramatic difference. What else do we have? And I saw a few comments about post-processing. I won't be doing much of that today. We did do one processing stream a little while back on Mars and stacking some data I got from a ZWO camera, but just because the stream, we've almost gone for 2 hours now, I probably won't do any processing today. But be on the lookout for that in the future, because that is something I want to do more often, especially as we get clearer skies. Our skies have been horrible lately. There might be a clear window coming up, so we'll see if we do a stream in the coming week. I would like to, but of course the moon's coming out pretty soon here. It's going to come out more frequently, so we're sort of going to be drowned out with moonlight now, of course, as it clears up. But all right, I think I got through a good amount of the initial questions. Let's scroll down back to the bottom and see if there was anything else. I don't have any off the top of my head, Greg. Greg asked about instructional videos on image stacking. I learned a fair bit of about image stacking through information provided by our Astro Society members, which we have a Copernic Astronomical Society here that I am a part of, and we have a bunch of members, and we all share information together in tips and tricks and such. So they've been super helpful on that front for me. I also read a fair bit about it. And I have viewed just plenty of instructional videos. I just don't know if I ever picked out a particular person that immediately comes to mind. I know there's a couple people on YouTube who do a lot with astrophotography, but I don't know how often they've done like processing videos. They might not show that aspect because I know that they have particular methods that they only like offer to people who are members or things like that. So that might be something worth exploring to see if that's out there. But there are, if you just search on YouTube for image stacking methods of Mars or image stacking methods of the moon, that's a great way to go about it and see what's out there and look at the different methods that people have tried. Okay. With that, I think that might be all the questions I am seeing for tonight. Oh, we got another one. Again, if you have any questions, I'm still happy to stick around for a little bit still. So feel free to ask. NK says, do you think it would be possible to observe light curves through smartphone astronomy or astrophotos? Or more generally, what kind of science could you do using data from smartphone astro? You can look at light curves. You know what? I don't want to necessarily. I think in Lightroom you might be able to access light curves. The Lightroom app on iPhone. You might be able to look at that data there. But I don't have an immediate. Usually, I just go to my computer, Lightroom on my computer, or on my Mac or PC, and look at the data that way. But there might be a way to look on directly on the iPhone if that's what you were asking. All right, it looks like that's about it for the questions. So I think I will wrap up the stream now. So thank you all for joining me tonight. There is plenty more to come in this topic. I think this was a good introductory. I know it started off, again, a little bit rough. My streams always seem to be that way. But I am looking forward to expanding on the knowledge we started with here tonight. There's a lot to uncover still about smartphones. And the thing about I'm sure you've noticed when it comes to upgrading smartphones, the camera is almost always what they focus on nowadays. Otherwise, it's a solved engineering problem, the smartphone at least. So I'm sure they're going to keep advancing that technology. We'll see where it goes, how far it goes. I'm more of a just more passively interested in it now as I've gotten into more mirrorless-based astrophotography and ZWO camera and whatnot. But I'm going to keep trying some methods with my phone since it is the camera I have on me at all times. So if it's the only camera you have at home, but you want to get into astrophotography, give it a try. It's totally possible and totally reasonable at this point to be your initial step into that area. Whereas again, a decade ago, not the case. So again, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week on our next stream. That one is on January 29th, and it is called America's Forgotten Space Program, which is on the Gemini missions. So we'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone.